So I'm certainly not questioning the legitimacy of the proclamation, nor, sir, am I questioning the need for governments, including the government of Canada, to take effective action to enforce law and order this time, particularly in view of the kidnappings that have taken place, the holding of these two men at ransom, and the apparent inability of methods that were being used to bring this crisis to a conclusion. I emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that I do not question the need for effective action being taken to enforce the laws of this country. And yet, the measure that has been adopted, we have to recognize the measure of invoking the War Measures Act is the most serious, the most drastic measure the government could have taken. Giving the government very broad powers, very wide powers. And I want to emphasize, of course, that the government has taken and the government must accept the responsibility for invoking this act, as it is it alone would be in a position, certainly we in the opposition would not be in a position to judge whether insurrection is real or to be apprehended. I say this is a very serious measure because it has obviously broad ramifications. The War Measures Act, of course, provides for the possibility of very sweeping interference with what we ordinarily consider civic rights of Canadians, civil liberties of Canadians. It's true that the government has presented to the House and has adopted regulations which do not invoke all the powers in the War Measures Act, but the War Measures Act having been invoked, there are certainly all sorts of additional powers in reserve that the government could utilize by regulation at any time. Furthermore, these powers, these extensive powers described in the regulations, are to be in effect until April the 1st, 1971. April 30th, 1971, a very considerable length of time. They apply, of course, throughout the country. And the Prime Minister himself has touched upon something that is a great concern to me, and that is the possibility that a measure such as this, leading to escalation, perhaps increasing the tendency of some people to be attracted to radical movements. And therefore, because I recognize the need for action, and I'm very concerned about the sweeping measures that the government has adopted, I think it's important that we at this time consider the need of restricting any extraordinary measures to the greatest possible extent and the shortest period of time. Now, I don't want to be partisan. I don't propose to be partisan, Mr. Speaker, at this time anyway. So, in due course, there have to be questions asked, I think, about the development of the condition in which we now find ourselves in this country. But I think the Prime Minister must find himself in a most extraordinary position. It's a man who advocated an entrenched Bill of Rights entrenchment of civil rights in our Constitution, and within a relatively short period of advocating this fervently, now being in a position of invoking the War Measures Act and suspending in a substantial way, the traditional civil liberties of Canadians for a substantial period of time. I think, Mr. Speaker, also that it's not good enough for a government simply to, when the country finds itself in a condition like this, it's not good enough for a government simply to put the finger and point the finger at certain revolutionaries which says it brought the country to this condition. I say, and I try to be fair in saying this, that the government in authority, while this condition develops, must also be prepared to answer for the conditions in which the country finds itself at this time. Now, if special danger exists, the government has taken the measures that it has taken. I happen to feel that, I believe strongly, in fact, that it would certainly be far preferable to have moved special legislation which far more restrictive than the powers that the government now has, having invoked the War Measures Act. Prime Minister has said that this was not possible. I'm not going to spend very much time this morning, sir, arguing about what was possible or what was done. But I do suggest, I assert, Mr. Speaker, that rather than the government coming in here this morning and seeking the approval of the House for a measure which the government has to accept the responsibility for having taken, I think the government should be concentrating on bringing before this House a bill which would carefully restrict the special powers that the government is seeking to deal with this condition, with proper safeguards for review, to reduce to a minimum possibility of any arbitrary action. I don't see that in these regulations. We don't really know when this will end. The regulations are sweeping. I must say that, I want to say perfectly clear, frankly, that I would not be prepared to support, myself, a bill that embraced these regulations. But I would certainly be prepared to cooperate in providing for a limited period of time such unusual powers, extraordinary powers, as were clearly necessary for the government to enforce the law. Consider, for example, Mr. Speaker, the provisions in these regulations. The regulations make it a crime. Regulations make it a crime to be a member of an unlawful association.